Andre Boudrias, number 21. Boudrias checked by Westfall. Now Sanderson steals it. Talbot's after him. Sanderson centering it out. Here's Ori to Carlton. He scores! Carlton firing it in on the short side, beating Wakely. And the Bruins go ahead 3-1.
Next, the Whaler newcomer this season, former captain and leading scorer of the Toronto Toros. Now he's on our side, twice an All-Star, the Swoop, Wayne Carleton.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Boland. I see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. This show is created to give a voice to former pro players and personalities, allowing them to share some of the greatest stories this game has to tell. So let's take a trip to the heart of the classic hockey universe and celebrate the history of the game with the select few who actually lived it. My guest on episode 71 is Wayne Swoop Carlton, who was an important part of the Boston Bruins 69-70 Stanley Cup championship team. In fact, he was on the ice when Bobby Orr scored his famous cup-clinching goal in the fourth game of the 1970 Stanley Cup final. Carlton played junior hockey for the Toronto Marlboros from 1961 through 1966, and he played a starring role in the Marlboro's 64 Memorial Cup championship team. After a brief stay with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Carlton was traded to the Bruins during the 69-70 season. With Boston, he teamed with Derek Sanderson and Eddie Westfall on a productive third line, which played especially well in the postseason. At the conclusion of a 22-goal 70-71 campaign with the Bruins, Carlton was claimed by the California Golden Seals in the interleague draft. After one season in Oakland, Carlton was one of many Seals players who would jump to the fledgling World Hockey Association. Carlton became an all-star in the WHA, topping the 90-point mark in 72-73 with the Ottawa Nationals, and in 73-74 when that franchise moved to Toronto and became the Toros. He was later traded to the New England Whalers, where he played in the Whalers' first season in Hartford before being traded to Edmonton from Mike Rogers in 75-76. Carlton suffered numerous knee injuries throughout his career, and after brief stretches in Edmonton and Birmingham, he retired from big league hockey. Wayne's got great stories to tell of his productive career, and the timing is perfect as we celebrate the Bruins' 50th anniversary of their 1970 Stanley Cup championship team. Before talking with Wayne, just a reminder to please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. This helps the show become more visible to hockey fans around the world. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Wayne Swoop Carlton. Well, we're real thrilled to have one of the most exciting players of the 1970s, a key part of that Bruins 1970 Stanley Cup team, also a perennial all-star in the World Hockey Association. He also played in that first Whalers team that played in Hartford in 1975. Wayne Swoop Carlton. Wayne, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here.
Wayne, I was curious, at your time as a young man, you were a much bigger player than most hockey players were at the time. You ended up being about 6 feet 3 inches tall. So growing up playing hockey, were you always one of the bigger players?
Yeah, I happened to be, from a young age, the biggest kid on all the teams I played on. And most of the time I didn't play in my own division. Like when I was 10, I was big enough I played up with the Bantams, which was 14-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So I was quite a big kid.
How did you, and the way hockey was back then for our younger fans, is that you grew up in the Sudbury, Ontario area, the Toronto Maple Leafs would have had your territorial rights at the time and done so at a pretty young age. How did that all come about? How were you first contacted by the Leafs, and how did you end up with the Toronto Marlboros?
Well, it's sort of a misnomer. I was born in Sudbury. My dad worked for the Sudbury Star, and he was up there just because he was a heck of a ball player. anyway, my mom didn't like it up there, so we moved down and come down to a little place called Beaton, which is just south of Barrie, and that's where I grew up, and that's where I grew up and played all my minor hockey. But then they scouted me. I was also scouted by Montreal. Scotty Bowman was up, and that was in the time they wanted me to go to Montreal. In fact, they had in our summer hockey banquets, they've sent up Boom Boom Jeffrey on a number of their players to speak in that couple of years. But my parents at that time weren't too enthused about going to Quebec, French language, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, of course, Toronto, Bob Davidson was doing the same. That's back when, they would sponsor your minor hockey to get you,
right?
Type of thing. So that's in essence what had happened, and that's how I ended up going to the Marlies, which was an affiliate of the Maple Leafs.
And playing, we've had on our show recently players such as Mike Corrigan, Gary Smith, a number of players who played at those Marlboro teams. And I try to explain to people, too, who are unfamiliar with it, the Marlboros, it wasn't just your typical junior hockey team. You played in the Gardens, you played before big crowds. What was the experience of being at Toronto Marlboro?
Well, as I say, I was a kid. When I went there, I went to actually Unionville. They sponsored the Metro Junior League back then when I come up, and to get me, I had to go. And it was the Metro Junior A League, and that's how I got to the Marlies. They brought me up as a 14-year-old, and I played. I forget how many games there. Probably I'm going to say maybe 10 or 12, and then they made a trade for me. They made a trade for me from one of the Marlies to Unionville, then brought me to the Marlboros.
I was curious, during that stretch, and you obviously were highly touted. You had a stretch in your last 3 years. If I look at it correctly, you probably scored in about 90 games. You scored about 60 goals, obviously highly productive. But also, one of the things that happened to you during your career, and I don't know if it happened at a young age, is you suffered a lot of knee problems. You ended up with eight surgeries, I believe. Did you start developing those injuries during this time period?
No, actually, yes. Actually, they all happened basically in when I was 17. As I said, I was a big kid. I was a good ball player too, but I ended up tearing my meniscus playing baseball in the summer, and that led to getting the way it was tore. It got into my knee joint and ripped up my knee joint, and there I only played. Basically, I only played about 20-some games there. From the time I was, from 62 till I actually 63, 64, and then I played with the Marlies, and then that was 64. That happened after we won the Memorial Cup. We were playing in my hometown there, baseball, and that's when I ripped up my knee, and kept on playing. And then in 64, 65. I played in 15 games, and then again 65, 66, I only played 16 games. So that was pretty much, and I still had years of eligibility left to play junior, and they decided to turn me pro when I was 19. In 66, 67, I went to Tulsa. I really needed the time. After going through all that, I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I spent 10 months in a row in the hospital where there was no weight bearing on my right leg. So, I really needed to have that extra year in junior, right, to get my confidence back and get back from my injuries. But they chose me to send me to the Central Hockey League, which was really first and second year pros, like guys that had played junior, finished junior, and then basically that's. But I was so far behind because I only played 31 games in 2 years. I scored 42 goals for the Marlies, 63-64, and won the Memorial Cup, right? I was second All-Star behind Dennis Hull, and then 64-65, I played 15 games, I had 13 goals, and then I played 16 games and had 9 goals. But I missed so much of those 2 seasons.
Yeah, it had to be extraordinarily difficult for a young guy. I mean, just even if you weren't playing hockey, being laid up for that amount of time and being away from your team, your teammates, you're building your career, you're building your reputation, and to be shelved for that amount of time had to be quite a test for a young man.
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, it was it was difficult. But as I said, I needed to stay in junior one more year.
Mm-hmm.
To get because I was going to be able to excel there because I had before, right? But they decided to turn me pro, and I played 52 games that year and ended up getting 17 goals. But it was the fact that I needed the time.
Right, absolutely. But how was that first year in playing hockey? And you grew up obviously in Canada, in the Ontario area. Now you're playing hockey in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as your first full. How was that?
Well, it was. Well, you're leaving home. When I say leaving home, you're going to another country, right? And you're away from your family, and you're 19 years old, starting a professional career, right? And coming off, time where I hadn't played a lot, and the expectations were obviously high for me because because of that year we won the Memorial Cup.
Mm-hmm.
But it took its toll. I mean, it took a toll on me, and I think that's why I didn't really get going, until later in my career when I was 24. It just took so much time to try and get back, trying to get back. And I had the same operation at 17 that Bobby Orr had. Damaged knee joint.
Wow.
And I ended up retiring at 29.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I didn't have a lot of time. As I said, the best years when I finally got going, was obviously when I got, and then I had no confidence when I come back and got traded to Boston. It was like somebody lifting weights off my shoulders to get out of, to get out of Toronto, because it just wasn't work. It wasn't working because I had no confidence. They had no confidence in me, but they'd never, you asked for the trades back then. They'd done whatever they wanted because you didn't have lawyers or anything. So, but anyway, it was what it was, and you take it with a grain of salt. You can't change history. So it's. It was what it was.
Absolutely. Wayne, I wanted to go back to Toronto for one quick second, and that is, I was curious, in 66, 67, you do score, you don't get a lot of time to leave. You do score your first goal in the National Hockey League at the end of that Maple Leafs dynasty. You're playing with a whole host of Hall of Famers and legends. But do you remember putting that Leafs jersey on for the first time back in 65, 66? And do you remember your first goal in 66, 67?
Yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure I scored it off the left wing. I let's put it this way: I probably wasn't in the right frame of mind to start into the National Hockey League, if you know what I mean,
mm-hmm.
with what was going on. Because Imlock and I didn't get along, period. So it was. It wasn't the happiest times. Let's put it that way. When it should have been a great experience. It was just so.
But there was a silver lining in all that, and eventually, as you noted, you get traded to the Bruins in exchange for Jim Harrison. And you arrive at the Bruins team as they have gone on the journey on the way to a Stanley Cup. Their team is getting better all the time. It's a strong team. So what's the atmosphere difference for you, like personally for you, and as a team in general? What was the biggest difference between Toronto and Boston?
Well, I think basically it can be summed up. It can be summed up. I made a mistake. Every time you made a mistake in Toronto, punch would pull you off, right, and never say nothing to you, right. So you just got. If you knew you made the mistake in the ice, you might as well skate. I just skated to the bench. But I did that in Boston. I worked there, and Harrison met me at the door. He says, "You're not in Toronto now." He says, "We all make mistakes here. Get out there." And that was just like somebody lifting, again, weights off your shoulders. And all of a sudden your attitude and you're, become very positive.
Now, your fans remember you in Boston being on an excellent line with number 18, Ed Westfall, number 16, Derek Sanderson.
Yep.
Is that something that happened right away, Wayne, or did you get on that line eventually? How did it all fit in?
Yeah, well, I was to play. The reason that Milt went out and got me, I guess, was because of Ron, I'm trying to think, he had the bad back.
Ron Murphy.
Ron Murphy. and that was to sort of replace him because they knew he wasn't going to be able to play. So they tried me out at a couple of different spots, center, and then we finally settled away at left wing because I did play center too. So
one thing when I talked to the Bruins, I've talked recently to Freddie Stanfield, Rick Smith. They talk about the camaraderie within that locker room with the Bruins, and is that something that you felt right away?
Yeah. No, that was a good group of guys. The guys all pulling in the same direction. And we had that attitude that you can never be beat type of thing, and that that I think was the catalyst. And plus, don't forget we had, as you know, we had Bobby and Phil and some pretty talented players. So, but
right.
But it takes a team to win a Stanley Cup. Unfortunately, there's no I in teams. So
right,
it takes all that and. Even though you have your major players, you still have to have guys step up when needed.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Bobby Orr, and I have to ask you, you, of course, knew of Bobby quite a bit, I'm sure.
Well, we played against each other as kids.
All right. So I remember you two getting interviewed. I think it was on Hockey Night in Canada at some point.
Hockey Night in Canada, Ward Cornell, yes.
So by 69-70, Bobby's really dominated the National Hockey League, and I guess I would ask you the obvious question is, what was it like to be a teammate of Bobby Orr, both his talent and his leadership on and off the ice?
Well, I mean, everybody knew how much talent he had, and not only that, but he was a fiery competitor and a leader, right? And he, to me, he led by example. He was the type of player that obviously there's nothing he couldn't do at any point in the game, and I mean, plus he was entertaining and all that stuff that goes with being a natural and a hell of a hockey player.
When I talk about hockey in Boston at that time period, the Boston Bruins were the kings of Boston. You're on Channel 38, and so they had everybody would tune in and get their rabbit ears on the TV to watch you guys play. It was an incredible experience. Did you feel that as a player? I mean, you guys were just larger than life, and everything just came together. You were a colorful team, an exciting team, and a dominant team. What was the atmosphere like in Boston at the time compared to maybe the atmosphere in Toronto?
Oh, well, I mean, let's be honest, Toronto was really struggling, right? When I got traded there, I mean, they were really, really struggling. And of course, obviously, Toronto's a great hockey city, but people were always looking for the winner. They're still looking for a Stanley Cup champion, right?
Yeah.
But when I come to Boston, there was certainly an air about the opportunity that we could win a Stanley Cup. And as we get further on in the season and things were going pretty good, it felt even more so. So it was certainly a year to remember, especially for me going there December 10th and having an opportunity, which I never thought I'd ever get.
Oh, absolutely. I guess that's one of those things in life where Toronto, one door closes, another one opens, and
that's
Toronto
right.
wasn't there, and Boston certainly changed your career, gave you a chance to win a Stanley Cup. But I wanted to ask you about a couple of players who have passed away in recent years and their contributions to the team and how you remember them. And the first one was right wing Johnny Pie McKenzie, who also ended up being a WHA original with you. But what type of guy was Johnny Pie?
Oh, well, Johnny Pie was quite a feisty little guy, both on and off the ice, and a great teammate. It's just funny. I can always remember that his jowls and his laugh. Just a very bubbly, great guy. Good Westerner.
Right. Another character player who kind of wasn't a superstar but added a lot to that team was Ace Bailey. And
Ace and I lived together.
Oh, really?
When I got traded from Toronto to Boston, that's who I lived with in Saugus.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So we had quite a connection, him and I, and obviously quite a friendship as another good Westerner.
Right.
Saskatchewan. We had a great time and a lot of fun.
Wayne, as you go through the playoffs, obviously, I think what everybody remembers Wayne Carleton, of course, when it mattered there in Game 4 against the St. Louis Blues, your line starts, and you're out there with Sanderson and Westfall. 40 seconds later, you're Stanley Cup champions. So, were you surprised, first of all, that your line started that period? And you were right there at the doorstep of that goal. If Glenn Hall kicks it out, maybe there's a statue of you out in front of the guard right now. You put it back in on the rebound.
let's put it this way: the right guy scored it.
Right.
Anyway, it was getting back to your question of whether we should have started. If you look back at all the games we played against St. Louis, the first three, we dominated them. I mean, absolutely dominated them. Our line. Every time, every shift. And so I could see why Harry started us, right? Because we actually, and guess what? That's exactly what happened. The puck went from center into their end and it was all over.
So you've grown up in a hockey atmosphere. You've seen the Toronto Maple Leafs win Stanley Cups. You've won a Memorial Cup. But the dream of winning a Stanley Cup becomes realized right then. And I was curious what that feels like. Not many people have that emotion. What did it feel like to finally win a Stanley Cup?
Well, as I said, that's what you play for, right? That's what you play for as a little kid, watching it on Saturday night hockey and black and white TV, the Stanley Cup. I mean, that was the epitome of playing the game. Mm-hmm. And to have an opportunity, you only get one chance every year. One team only gets one chance every year, and to be fortunate enough to be there, and even more fortunate to be on the ice when the overtime goal scored to win the Stanley Cup is certainly something that's what dreams are made of. Absolutely,
you're immortalized forever in that famous scene. So you win the Stanley Cup, and this team is young, talented, and you're a key part of it. The next year, the team they call the Record Breakers, one of the most powerful teams in the history of hockey, maybe top 2 or 3 best teams in the history of hockey. 70-71 Bruins, I think you get about 10-20 goal scorers. You're among them with 22, and you got to be feeling invincible. When you go on the road or someone comes into the Boston Garden, you had to have a feeling of this is a game you're probably going to win.
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, who are you playing against? The Montreal Canadiens, who have a record that's unbelievable in Stanley Cups. And at that time, we weren't playing as well as we had been or could, right? And I'm a firm believer that you want to be going into the playoffs on the upswing, not on the downswing.
Right.
And I thought we were not on the downswing, but certainly we weren't on the upswing. And then we run into a goaltender named Ken Dryden out of Cornell. I mean, he stood in his head.
Oh yeah.
And when things aren't going your way, right, especially in a playoff series, it's not long before you start doubting yourself, especially if they get up a couple of games on you and you're having trouble beating this goalie. And I think that's basically what happened. We didn't get no puck bounces. And to me, it was very disappointing. Thinking we had that opportunity to I don't say be a dynasty, but to win another Stanley Cup. But as fast as you thought, as good as you were, and that you should beat this team, obviously, as I say, hot goaltenders in playoffs can turn the fortunes very quickly, and that's exactly what happened. And when you go back and look at the stats, we just couldn't get the job done, and a lot of it was the guy in net. And the rivalry with Montreal. Montreal and Boston had a great rivalry, so that just gives them a catalyst to be better.
That feeling in that locker room after Game 7 had to be a real sad, disheartening experience.
Very disappointing. I said very, very disappointing. So, it's as much as we had the high the year before, it was equally a devastating low.
Right.
And then then things happened. They made some changes, and then were able to win it the following year. And so out of that carnage, you move on, because that's what happens. You're not masters of your own fate when you're playing pro sport.
Right. Well, you certainly learned that. You're yourself personally. They have the intra-league draft at the time, and you're chosen. So you go from one extreme to the other. You go from a powerhouse Bruins team to 3,000 miles away in Oakland, California, to a team that's in a bit of disarray at that point. And to add to the misery, you're in a arbitration situation right away with Charlie Finley. It had to be from a professional standpoint, very disappointing going to the West Coast.
It was very disappointing, because I just got married after we won the Stanley Cup, and after we won the Stanley Cup, I got home, I got married. My wife was pregnant out in California after going out there, and so it was. It wasn't the highlight of my career, I can tell you that.
No, I think it started out very, very slowly. The team actually, by the time that year was over, the team was actually playing some decent hockey. You had some good talent. I've talked to Rick Smith about this, but you had really Bobby Sheehan, yourself, Paul Schmier, Jerry Pinder. You had the pieces in place for a good team, but unfortunately,
we were probably. I would say that team was probably with what we had there was probably a year or two away. I'm talking from experience, from learning how to play out of Oakland, because you only had LA was the closest team. The rest were all then Minnesota and all down east. But I thought from an experience point of view, that probably would have been, we'd have done very well. But it's all about timing. When you're on. But it was difficult out there. I couldn't wait. That's why a lot of us, I think there was 14 of us off that team, jumped to the WHA the next year.
Yeah, it was an incredible, over that 71-72 off season. As you said, there was double-digit players who left the team. Before I go to that, in Ottawa for 1 second, I wanted to ask you about playing for the Seals. The one thing that you just mentioned how LA was really the only team close to you out there, but what was the travel like? What were those road trips like, being a member of the Seals?
Well, the bottom line is you were gone. You went and played 5 or 6 games down east, so you were going through the time change, flying, getting there, playing, and starting your road trip, and then turn around and flying all the way back, picking up the hours, and then somebody maybe was sitting there waiting for you to play at home.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. So I mean, it took some time, especially when you're young, to try and get used to that all the time changes and the rest of it. And as I said, my wife was pregnant at the time, and she didn't want to have our child down there because of the Vietnam War at the time. All the things that outside of hockey that play on your mind as to what you should or shouldn't be doing.
Right. Well, you noted that the World Hockey Association came around at the right time. Now, I just actually was talking with Howard Baldwin, who, of course, was the founder of the Whalers and eventually became WHA president. He said, today's players should give a portion of their check to those original WHA guys who made that leap and took that chance, because you could have been blackballed from the NHL. That league folded right away. But you go to Ottawa, I'm sure you got a pay raise, but a chance to go back home. Talk a little bit about that whole process of signing with the Ottawa Nationals at WHA.
Well, it was something come up. I didn't want to go back to Oakland, nor my wife didn't want to go back to Oakland. So when that opportunity come up, I took it. Yes, it was a lot more money than I was making, but there was no guarantees, as we all know. Mm-hmm. And we had a young team in Ottawa. We didn't have no superstars. If you looked at the lineup, it was a young bunch of guys, and we ended up making the playoffs the first year, which was quite surprising. But and then from there, the owner went bankrupt before the playoffs, and we ended up moving to Toronto.
Yeah, I remember you became briefly because when the Whalers played the team in the playoffs, it was the Toronto Nationals, I believe, for that
Toros.
Right. But I think in that playoff series, you still were called the Nationals, then became the Toros.
Maybe we were. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with it all.
Oh my goodness, yeah. But now, what was the difference? You were playing the first year at the WHA. What was the difference in the caliber of play and the life in the WHA compared to the NHL?
Well, I think it was a much tougher league than the National Hockey League, as far as we had a lot of guys up from the Eastern League, right, getting the first crack at it, where they were used to scrapping all the time and carrying on, right, as opposed to the National Hockey League was more disciplined. Now, Bill Friday said to me, he said that the toughest league he ever refereed in was the WHA,
right,
when it first started, and you had a lot of young guys, the young players that were coming out of junior, right. And so it was quite a mixture of old, young, and in between, and guys trying to prove themselves from where they were coming from, whether it was the National Hockey League or the American Hockey League or whatever. So and there were some good teams. There was some good teams. As the league expanded, players got better. Not only from experience, but age and so on, and then other players come over and so on and so forth. So it was like you didn't have, like when I played in Ottawa, I didn't have no superstars on my left or right wing.
No,
you had whoever they put on the wing, type of thing, and that's and that's the way it goes. But we had a good bunch of guys, good camaraderie, and it was certainly different. And I've often said that if it wasn't for the WHA, the guys in the National Hockey League would have never made the money they made.
No question.
Because Eagleson certainly wasn't going to give it to them, or was the owners.
Right.
So.
How? One question I wanted to ask you is, because you were a bigger player, but you weren't afraid to stick your nose in there, but you're obviously a goal scorer and a playmaker. Did you find yourself at your size getting tested more or less than the average player?
Neither. I was much bigger than a lot of the guys, right? Like I said, I don't know if I was, but I was big and strong. And that makes a big difference, right? When you're stronger than most of them, whether you fight or not, it's how you handle them, right?
Right.
And so I didn't think it was a whole lot different than where I was playing before, other than, as I said, you didn't play with the same caliber of players to start with. Right.
Well, you end up in a very interesting trade coming to New England and becoming a part of the New England Whalers franchise in 74-75. You traded for Jim Dory, and kind of an odd trade because Jim stayed with the team for a while, and which is very rare. We wouldn't see that these days. And I think for tax purposes, he ended up being traded officially on January 1 of 75.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, you joined the Whalers, and when you come here, you are joined with a lot of guys that you know and a lot of players you play with through the Toronto organization. And what was your impression of the New England Whalers at that time?
Well, they'd already won an Avco Cup, and so you knew you had a birdie. I basically come to New England, which off 2 90-point seasons, right? Coming to New England, I ended up being the third line center, so that meant I didn't play the power plays.
Mm-hmm.
If you look back on it, I played with whoever, usually it was Donnie Blackburn and whoever was on the right wing, right?
Right.
So I never got an opportunity, where in Toronto, of course, I played the power plays, right, and all the other stuff. I think I still ended up leading the team in scoring.
Yes, you did.
But I never played any of the power plays, or that was reserved for Tommy Webster, rest his soul, and Larry Plow and Tim Sheehy and the guys that had played there previously.
Mm-hmm. Wayne, you mentioned Tom Webster, a player that you obviously played with at Hartford and would have played against at various stages of your career.
Yep.
Obviously just passed away tragically. What are your memories of Tom Hawkeye Webster as a player and a person?
Oh, Tommy was a great player and a great guy. He never had success in the National League, but certainly had a lot of success in the WHA. But I think from what I've read and everything, he was a good hockey person as far as scouting, and everybody looked like everybody loved him. He was a feisty guy. He was a feisty guy, both on and off the ice. So obviously, reading the article, I haven't seen Tommy Webster for years. So, but he was certainly a quality guy.
Speaking of feisty, Wayne, this is the anniversary of what's infamously called the Brawl in the Mall, the fight between the New England Whalers and the Minnesota Fighting Saints.
Oh, yeah.
What is your recollection of that melee?
Well, that's when me and Carlton got involved. Jack Carlton, I remember I got a hold of him. I got a hold of him, threw him on the ice, and got on top of him, and he couldn't get his hands going or nothing. So I pinned him down there. He wasn't happy, but he never got a chance to get at anybody.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was a smart decision on your part, to be sure. And, you talk about your role with the Whalers, and even in the next season, 75 and 76, you're still averaging about a point a game in that second and third line role. You traded to Edmonton, and I guess at that point your knees are becoming problematic. Did you know?
No, that really wasn't the story there. What happened was we went on a road trip out west, and I got appendicitis, and my appendix burst. I was really sick in Oakland. We flew to Denver, and I was really ill. And they said, "Oh no, we need you to dress." I started to dress, and I passed out.
Oh.
And they rushed me to the hospital there, and of course my appendix burst, and I was out there for 10 days.
Wow, I did not know that.
Lost 20-some pounds.
Could have died.
Yep, lost 20-some pounds, and when I got back, and I had a no trade clause, and Jack Kelly wanted to trade for Mike Rogers, and they told me I shouldn't play the rest of the season. This was in, I'm going to say January, sometime middle of January.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor said, you should not play the rest of the season. You need to get yourself all back together, right? Because of the poison that went through your system, plus the loss of the weight, right?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I relented and I ended up going to, that's when I went to Edmonton. And I played the last, I'm going to say, I played the last 26 games. I played 35 games up till this happened, and then I played the last 26 games with Edmonton. But I certainly wasn't myself, I can tell you that.
No, I can imagine. That's, again, the type of thing that wouldn't happen these days, with the...
No. I mean, I
crazy.
wouldn't, if it had a lawyer, if I'd had somebody give me some guidance, but I was pissed off that they were wanting to, trade me
Mm-hmm.
after the way they dealt with it. And anyway, and then the next year I got in with Pocklington, you see, and then I never played in the WHA after that, except for Birmingham. They signed me I was playing senior at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and played one game. I think it was against New England, scored a goal. And my lawyers phoned me. He said, "Don't." And we were already on our way to Birmingham. And I wouldn't dress for the game. I wouldn't dress for the game in Birmingham because he told me, he says, "Don't," because he said you're in a legal battle with the Edmonton Oilers. So.
Oh.
So that's what happened there.
Wow. Did not know that.
Then I come home and played senior with the Barrie Flyers, and we come one game short of winning the Allen Cup. So that was the end of my career. I retired I was 29.
Wow, that's just incredible. Just when you should be peaking.
And then what's his name? Emily Francis phoned me from the Rangers. Wanted to know if I'd consider coming back to the National Hockey League, and I was very honest with them. I said, my right knee is not good. I said, I just don't think I could play to what I would expect my capabilities to be. And I just said, I have to pass.
How was, that must have been tempting, however, and nonetheless, but now that your career gets short-circuited, injuries being a big role there, how's your transition out of hockey? How was that those first couple of years being away from the game?
Fine. I bought a lot of real estate when I was playing. I I had 4 farms up here in the Collingwood area, and since over time, so I farmed and raced a few horses, and went to work for my buddy selling cars after I got out, Daryl Sly, and who I played with in Rochester, and we're still in Collingwood here, and I've got my financial services company, which I've had for I guess now going on 35 years.
Wow.
I still go to the office and still have my clients that I've had for 35 years.
Well, that's the way to do it.
Do that, and then my wife of 50 years, she nursed at the Collingwood Hospital for 35 years. And we've got my son who has a party rental business here, and then I have 3 grandkids, 2 boys and a girl. So we're from a family perspective, we're I guess comparatively healthy. I've had a couple knees replaced, and you go through the aches and pains that you got over the years of playing, but other than that, things aren't too bad. So I'm I feel sometimes quite blessed. But when I got out of hockey, I coached my son when I got out of hockey for a year, and now he coaches the grandkids. So anyway, that's
good to keep you in grandpa, of course. I'm assuming you still have your Stanley Cup ring.
Oh yeah, I got all that stuff. I never had no need to sell it. And said I got 3 grandkids, so they're into hockey, and that. So someday they'll figure out how to do whatever. I know I've got my stick, and they had that, and my sweater, and that type of stuff. But yeah.
That's great. Well, we're looking forward to eventually having a reunion of that 1969-70 team, hopefully sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, I really wanted to thank you for taking the time. Quite a fascinating career. Learned a lot today. And we look forward to, sometime soon, seeing you back in Boston.
Well, okay, Mark. Well, thanks for your time, and certainly enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. If you enjoy listening to the show, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show on iTunes. This helps make our podcast more visible and accessible to hockey fans around the world. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for the show, please contact me at prohockeyalumni.org or via social media at Pro Hockey Alumni. The Pro Hockey Alumni greatly appreciates your support.